He saved the Queen's abandoned child. She rewarded him with command of her legion. Embers in the void. The acrid smell of plasma fire clung to Darren Voss's skin as he navigated the smoldering ruins of what had once been the thriving outpost of Helios Station. His weathered combat suit, bearing the insignia of the Freelance Coalition, was stained with the grime of 3 days in battle. The freelancer wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the horizon with eyes that had seen too much death across too many worlds. "Talia, give me a bioscan of the Eastern Quadrant," Darren murmured into his comm unit. "Nothing substantial," came the synthesized voice of his ship's AI. "Wait. Faint life sign detected in Section 7. Unusual signature." Darren frowned, adjusting his course toward the coordinates flashing on his retinal display. The Krillian invasion had been swift and merciless. He'd arrived too late to save the outpost, but perhaps not too late to salvage something from this disaster. The sound reached him before the sight, a soft musical keening that seemed to vibrate the very air. Pushing aside a fallen support beam, Darren found himself staring at a small alcove formed by collapsed debris, and within it, a child. But not a human child. This tiny being's skin shimmered with a soft purple luminescence, with delicate tendrils where hair might be on a human child. The infant's wide eyes, faceted like amethysts, fixed on Darren with an intelligence that belied its small size. "Nixian," Darren whispered in recognition. The reclusive and powerful race rarely ventured beyond their home system of Ixora. What was one of their young doing here, so far from home? As he hesitated, the child reached toward him with small fingers. The movement shifted a pendant around the infant's neck, a royal crest Darren instantly recognized from his military briefings. "Stars above," he breathed. "You're of the royal house." A distant explosion rocked the ground. Darren didn't hesitate further. He lifted the child, who immediately clung to him, those tiny fingers gripping his armor with surprising strength. "Talia, prepare for emergency departure, and get me everything you have on current Nixian diplomatic channels." "The Nixian sovereignty hasn't responded to any interstellar communications in months," Talia replied. "Intelligence suggests internal conflicts." Darren's jaw tightened as he navigated the ruins, shielding the child with his body as debris continued to rain down. "Well, they're about to respond to me." 3 days later, Darren's ship, the Wayward Star, entered the restricted space of Ixora. Immediately, sleek vessels with crystalline hulls surrounded him, weapons primed. "Unidentified vessel, you have breached sovereign territory. Prepare to be boarded or destroyed," came a melodic yet threatening voice over the comm. "I come under banner of sanctuary," Darren responded using the ancient protocol. "I bear precious cargo belonging to your people." There was a pause, then. "Verification required." Darren transmitted the image of the pendant. Within moments, his ship was being escorted to the crystalline palace that orbited Ixora Prime, like a second moon. The royal court of the Nixians was unlike anything Darren had ever seen. Vast chambers of living crystal pulsed with bioluminescent light, while the assembled court, all with that distinctive purple skin in varying shades, regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. At the center sat Queen Zivara, her luminescence brighter than all others, the tendrils framing her face moving gently as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. Her eyes widened when she saw the child in Darren's arms. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice carrying despite its softness. "My Lyra." As Darren approached and gently transferred the child to her mother's waiting arms, he noted the tears that fell from the Queen's eyes, tears that crystallized into tiny gems before touching the ground. "How came you by the heir to the Nixian throne, human?" asked a stern voice to the Queen's right, her first guardian, Darren guessed. "I found her amid the ruins of Helios Station after the Krillian attack," Darren answered truthfully. "The station was evacuated. She must have been separated from whoever was protecting her." "She was with her father's diplomatic contingent," Queen Zivara said, her gaze still fixed on her child. "We received word of the attack, but were told all were lost." Her eyes, multifaceted and deep as space itself, finally lifted to meet Darren's. "You have returned to me what I thought forever gone. Name your reward, freelancer." Darren shifted uncomfortably. "I need no reward for doing what any decent being would do." The Queen's expression shifted subtly, a smile touching her lips. "Perhaps not a reward then, but an opportunity. The Nixian Royal Guard has never had an outsider among its ranks. let alone leading a division. Yet who better to train them in the ways of the greater galaxy than one who has navigated its dangers so successfully? The court erupted in whispers. The first guardian looked appalled. "My queen, this is unprecedented," he began. "As is the safe return of my child when all hope was lost," Queen Zivara interrupted. "What say you, Darren Voss? Will you stay and serve the throne that now owes you a debt beyond measure?" Darren looked around at the hostile faces, at the tiny child now sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and at the queen whose eyes held a mixture of hope and command. His life as a freelancer had been solitary, purposeless beyond the next contract. Here was something different, something meaningful. "I will serve," he said simply, and knelt before the Nixian throne. Crown and honor. The first month in the crystalline palace was a study in isolation for Darren. Despite the queen's decree, the Nixian royal guard regarded him with barely concealed contempt. Their training sessions became thinly veiled attempts to humiliate him, their crystalline armor and energy weapons a stark contrast to his weathered combat suit. "Again, Outlander," Commander Thaxis ordered after Darren had been thrown to the ground for the 5th time. The commander's deep purple skin darkened with what Darren had come to recognize as satisfaction. "Perhaps your heroism was merely fortunate timing." Darren rose slowly, feeling the bruises forming along his ribs. He'd faced worse odds on dozens of battlefields, but never such concentrated disdain. "Perhaps," he replied evenly, settling back into a fighting stance. This time, when Thaxis lunged, Darren sidestepped, not with the fluid grace of the Nixians, but with the practical efficiency that had kept him alive through countless mercenary campaigns. His counterstrike caught the commander off guard, sending him stumbling. A tense silence fell over the training arena. No Outlander had ever bested a Nixian warrior in combat, let alone their commander. "Impressive adaptation," came a melodic voice from the entrance. Queen Zivara stood watching, little Princess Lyra balanced on her hip. The queen's formal attire had been replaced by simpler garments, though no less elegant. "Commander Thaxis, I see you are testing our new division leader thoroughly." Thaxis bowed stiffly. "As is my duty, Your Radiance." "Indeed." The queen's gaze shifted to Darren. "Walk with me, Division Leader Voss. I would discuss your assessment of our defenses." As they strolled through the living gardens where crystal formations grew alongside exotic flora, Darren found himself relaxing for the first time since his arrival. "They hate me," he said bluntly. Zivara laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "They fear change, and you represent the greatest change in a millennium." She allowed Lyra down to toddle among the crystal growths, the child's delighted giggles echoing. "The Nixian sovereignty has remained isolated too long. Recent events have proven this. The attack on your diplomatic mission wasn't random," Darren guessed. "No." Her expression darkened. "The Krillians targeted my consort's ship specifically. There are those who do not wish for Nixia to emerge from isolation, including some within your court," Darren observed quietly. Zivara nodded, watching as Lyra examined a pulsing crystal formation with curious fingers. "My consort believed, as I do, that our future lies in alliance, not isolation. His death has emboldened the traditionalist." Her eyes, those multifaceted jewels, fixed on Darren. "Which is why I need someone unbound by our traditions, someone who sees with different eyes. I'm just a mercenary, Your Radiance. You are the man who saved my daughter when you could have simply walked away. That tells me more about your character than any title." She stepped closer. "The division I've given you is composed of younger warriors, those who share my vision of a more connected future. Train them not just in combat, but in understanding the galaxy beyond our borders." Darren watched Lyra, so innocent yet already the center of political machinations. "And what of your daughter? She'll need protection more than anyone. She has become attached to you," Zivara admitted with a small smile. "She asks for the Starman daily. I've noticed some of your courtiers don't approve of that attachment either." "I am queen," she said simply, her tendrils stirring with what Darren now recognized as emotion. "My approval is what matters." 3 months later, Darren stood before his division. 30 young Nixian warriors who had gradually shifted from resentment to reluctant respect as he introduced combat techniques unknown in their isolated world. They were still formally rigid compared to the adaptable fighting styles he preferred, but they were learning. "Today we integrate your energy weaponry With variable terrain tactics, he announced. The enemy will not always meet you on ceremonial grounds. Division leader, one of the warriors, Ilara, spoke up. She had been among the first to truly listen to his teachings. There are reports of unrest in the outer settlements. Rumors that the traditionalists are gathering support. Darren frowned. Has the Royal Intelligence Corps investigated? They are reluctant to act without more evidence, Ilara replied carefully. The implication was clear. Elements of the Intelligence Corps sympathized with the traditionalists. Darren had suspected as much from his observations of court interactions. Then perhaps we should conduct training exercises near these settlements, Darren suggested, purely for educational purposes, of course. A ripple of understanding passed through his division. They were young, yes, but not naive. Many had aligned themselves with the Queen's progressive vision, making them targets for traditionalist resentment. That evening, Darren was summoned to the Queen's private chambers, an unprecedented honor that caused raised eyebrows among the court. He found Zivara not in her usual regal attire, but in simple robes, her tendrils unbound and flowing freely. Lyra sat playing with crystalline building blocks that glowed gently at her touch. "Starman," the little princess called out. Abandoning her blocks to rush to him, without thinking, Darren knelt and caught her in a gentle embrace. "Your radiance," he acknowledged, looking up at Zivara. "You summoned me?" "I understand your division plans training exercises in the outer reaches," she said, gesturing for him to rise. "A wise initiative." "Your intelligence network is efficient," Darren noted with a slight smile. "In some respects." She poured a luminescent liquid into 2 crystal glasses. "There are whispers of a coordinated effort to undermine my rule. The traditionalists claim I dishonor my consort's memory by allowing outlanders such as yourself positions of influence." "Do you wish me to step down?" Darren asked directly. "No." The force of her response surprised them both. She handed him one of the glasses, their fingers brushing momentarily. "I wish you to succeed. The future I envision, the future my consort died for, requires breaking with traditions that no longer serve us." Lyra had returned to her blocks, constructing an intricate formation with surprising dexterity for one so young. "She has her father's gift for architecture," Zivara said softly, watching her daughter, "and perhaps your courage." "I'm not sure courage can be passed by example in so short a time," Darren replied. "You underestimate your influence." Zivara's eyes met his, on all of us. There was something in her gaze that Darren had not permitted himself to acknowledge until now, something beyond royal gratitude or political alliance. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. "The outer settlements," he said, deliberately changing the subject. "I believe we should investigate thoroughly." "My division is ready." Zivara nodded, the moment passing but not forgotten. "Be careful, Darren. You have become important to the future of Nixia, to Lyra." A pause, and to me. As Darren bowed and took his leave, he caught a final glimpse of mother and daughter silhouetted against the vast viewport that displayed the glittering expanse of their star system. 2 beings of remarkable beauty and strength, now inextricably linked to his fate. Whatever dangers the traditionalists posed, whatever political storms gathered on the horizon, Darren knew with sudden certainty that his days as a rootless mercenary were over. He had found something worth fighting for. Whispers among the stars' detention had given Darren too much time to think. 7 days had passed since the Queen's secret visit. 7 days of calculating angles and opportunities. He had counted the guard rotations, noted the subtle differences in the crystalline barrier's resonance at different hours, and observed the slight power fluctuation that occurred during shift changes. Tonight would be his opportunity. As expected, the barrier dimmed momentarily as the security system cycled. In that brief window, Darren wedged the modified energy cell he'd extracted from his boot heel into the barrier's edge. The containment field sputtered, creating a gap barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by bioluminescent crystals. Darren moved silently, employing the shadow-walking techniques he'd taught his division. The irony wasn't lost on him, being hunted by the very warriors he'd trained. "Division leader." A whisper came from an alcove. Ilara emerged, her purple skin darkened to near black to blend with the shadows. "We have little time." "Situation report," Darren demanded as they moved through service passages rarely used by the royal court. The conclave has scheduled the rite of succession for tomorrow's dawn, Ilara explained. Elder Myrax has presented fabricated evidence of your intimacy with the Queen, surveillance footage altered to show private meetings, communications taken out of context, and Thalen, positioned as the voice of reason and tradition. He speaks of preserving Nixian purity, while expressing regret for his sister-in-law's misguided affections. Ilara's tendrils rippled with disgust. Many in court are aligning with him already, seeking favor with the likely successor. They reached a maintenance shaft that would take them to the upper levels. And the princess? Heavily guarded in the royal nursery, Thalon has suggested she be tested for genetic purity. Darren's blood ran cold. He means to disqualify her from succession regardless of what happens to Zivara. Yes, and with both removed, Ilara left the implication hanging. Where is the Queen now? In ritual isolation before the rite, none may see her except her handmaidens. Ilara hesitated, but one of her most trusted has arranged something. Follow me. They emerged in a section of the palace Darren had never seen. Ancient chambers with crystal formations that predated the modern architecture. In a small grotto illuminated by phosphorescent moss, a Nixian woman waited, her elaborate headdress marking her as one of the Queen's senior handmaidens. Mistress Lyria. Ilara greeted her with a formal bow. The older Nixian appraised Darren with sharp eyes. So this is the outsider who has captured our Queen's attention. Her tone was neutral, impossible to read. I serve the Queen and the Princess, Darren replied simply. As do you, I hope. I have served 3 queens across 2 centuries, Lyria said. I know court intrigue when I see it, and this reeks of orchestration. From her robes, she produced a small crystal orb that pulsed with stored data. Security recordings from the night of the diplomatic mission's departure, the night the princess's father was killed. The orb projected a holographic sequence showing the royal landing bay. Darren watched as Thalon conversed with a hooded figure before the diplomatic vessel departed. The figure's features were obscured, but something in their bearing struck Darren as familiar. Freeze image, he commanded. The projection halted. Enhance the reflection in the bay doors. The image clarified, revealing the hooded figure's reflection, a Krillian military officer. He conspired with the very species that attacked the diplomatic mission. Darren breathed. And killed his own brother, Lyria confirmed grimly. A convenient path to power, especially if the Queen and Princess can be removed as well. Ilara looked stricken. This is high treason. With this evidence, the conclave is already compromised, Darren interrupted. We need to reach the Queen directly and ensure the Princess's safety before presenting this. Impossible, Lyria said. The ritual isolation is absolute. Even I cannot access her until the rite begins. Darren thought for a moment. Then we need to get this evidence to someone who can act immediately and protect both the Queen and Princess while we prepare a counteroffensive. The first guardian, Ilara suggested. Despite his traditional views, his loyalty to the crown is absolute. If he sees proof of Thalon's treason, he'll move to protect the royal line, Darren finished. Can you reach him? Yes, through the ceremonial guard rotation. But you cannot be seen. The entire palace is searching for you. I need to ensure Lyra's safety personally, Darren insisted. I don't trust anyone else with her protection right now. Lyria studied him thoughtfully. There is a passage from these ancient chambers to the royal nursery, once used to evacuate royal children during past conflicts. Few remember it exists. As plans were finalized, Darren felt a strange sensation, a vibration through the crystal floor beneath them. He placed his palm against the nearest formation. Something's happening. These crystals are resonating at an unusual frequency. Lyria's eyes widened. The ancient warning system. The palace is being breached. The attack came with precision timing, exactly when palace security was focused on the upcoming rite and the search for an escaped prisoner. Explosions rocked the lower levels as Krillian infiltrators emerged from concealed positions throughout the palace. It's a coup, Darren realized. Thalon is making his final move with Krillian support. Abandoning stealth, they raced through the ancient passages. Ilara split off to find the first guardian with the evidence, while Darren and Lyria headed for the royal nursery. They arrived to find the guards already engaged with Krillian attackers. Using combat techniques unfamiliar to the Nixians, the invaders had nearly breached the nursery doors. Darren didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the fray, his hybrid fighting style catching the Krillians off guard. Years of mercenary work against various species had taught him their vulnerabilities, knowledge he now employed with lethal efficiency. "Get the princess," he shouted to Lyria as he created an opening. The handmaiden slipped through the momentary gap while Darren held the attackers at bay. Moments later, Lyria emerged with Lyra clutched tightly in her arms. The child's eyes brightened when she saw Darren. "Starman," she cried, reaching for him despite the chaos. "We need to reach the queen," Darren said, taking the princess from Lyria. "The ritual isolation chambers. Where are they?" "Central spire, highest level. But the main lifts will be compromised." "Then we climb," Darren decided, securing Lyra against his chest. The ascent through emergency shafts was arduous. Twice they encountered Krillian patrols and were forced to hide in maintenance recesses. Throughout it all, Lyra remained remarkably calm, her tiny fingers gripping Darren's armor, as if understanding the gravity of their situation. "You've been very brave," Darren told her softly during a brief rest. "Just like your mother." "Bad people want to hurt Mama," Lyra replied with disconcerting clarity. "Uncle too." Darren exchanged a glance with Lyria. Even at her young age, the princess possessed the perceptive abilities of her species. When they finally reached the upper level, they found the ritual chambers guarded by traditionalist Nixians rather than royal security. Darren's heart sank. Thalen had already positioned his loyalists around the queen. "There's another approach," Lyria whispered, directing them to a maintenance panel that opened into a narrow service tunnel, the ventilation system for the ritual bath. The space was barely wide enough for Darren to squeeze through with Lyra. Steam from the ritual baths made the tunnel slick and disorienting, but they pressed forward until they reached a decorative grate overlooking a serene pool. Below, Queen Zivara floated in the luminescent waters, her tendrils spread in ritual meditation, unaware of the chaos engulfing her palace. The sight of her momentarily stole Darren's breath, her purple skin glowing with inner light, her face serene despite the danger surrounding her. "Mama," Lyra called before Darren could stop her. Zivara's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. She rose from the water, ritual garments clinging to her form as she searched for the source of her daughter's voice. Darren removed the grate, lowering himself and Lyra into the chamber. "Your Radiance, the palace is under attack. Thalen has allied with the Krillians, the same who killed your consort." Recognition and alarm flashed across Zivara's face as she rushed to embrace her daughter. "Thalen, I suspected political ambition, but not outright treason." "We have evidence," Darren explained quickly. "Ilara is bringing it to the First Guardian." A commotion outside the chamber doors told them time was running short. Zivara's expression hardened into regal determination. She reached for a concealed panel in the wall, revealing a ceremonial weapon, an energy staff crackling with power. "The Queen's scepter," she explained, activating the ancient weapon. Not merely ceremonial, despite what the court believes. The doors burst open. Thalen entered, flanked by guards and 2 Krillian officers. His expression shifted from triumph to shock at the tableau before him. The Queen armed and ready, Darren at her side, and the princess watching with unnervingly adult understanding. "Sister?" Thalen recovered smoothly. "I come to protect you from this fugitive who has abducted your child." "Strange protection that comes with foreign invaders," Zivara replied coldly, her scepter pointed unwaveringly at his heart. "Strange loyalty that conspires with those who murdered your brother." Warriors of 2 worlds. The settlement of Crystallis Edge clung to the jagged mountains that formed the border of Nixian habitable territory. Once a thriving outpost for stellar observation, it had grown quieter in recent years, its crystal spires dulled by neglect. As Darren's division established their training camp on the outskirts, the settlement's inhabitants watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "They fear we've come to enforce some new royal edict," Ilara observed as they unpacked equipment. "The traditionalists have been spreading rumors that the Queen plans to settle off-worlders in the outer territories." "And is that why you joined my division?" Darren asked, studying her reaction. "To prevent such changes?" Ilara's tendrils rippled in what Darren now recognized as thoughtful consideration. "I joined because stagnation leads to extinction. The attack that nearly took Princess Lyra proved our isolation hasn't protected us. It's merely left us vulnerable to threats we don't understand." Darren nodded. increasingly impressed by the young warrior's insight. Then let's show these people we're here to protect, not threaten them. Over the next week, Darren integrated his division into the community. They assisted with repairs to the settlement's energy grid, demonstrated defense techniques to curious youth, and shared meals with local families. Gradually, suspicion gave way to cautious acceptance, but not everyone was won over. "Your presence defiles sacred ground," an elder said one evening as Darren sat alone, reviewing security protocols on his datapad. The Nixian's skin was a deep, almost midnight purple, his tendrils bound in the traditional style of the conservative factions. "Elder Myrax," Darren acknowledged, recognizing the settlement's spiritual leader from intelligence briefings. "I wasn't aware we had encroached on sacred sites." "All of Nixia is sacred to those who honor our traditions," Myrax replied coldly. "Your queen may have forgotten this, but the people have not. She is your queen as well," Darren reminded him mildly. "A queen who beds an alien would forfeit her right to rule," Myrax hissed. Darren maintained his composure despite the shocking accusation. "You speak treason, elder, and falsehood." "Do I?" Myrax's eyes narrowed. "The court whispers of how she summons you to her private chambers, how the princess calls for you like a father. The gratitude of a child I rescued hardly constitutes evidence of impropriety," Darren replied, though his heart raced at the dangerous implications of such rumors. "The conclave of elders convenes in 7 cycles, Myrax said, ignoring Darren's defense. "We shall see what evidence is required when tradition itself is at stake." With that ominous statement, he departed, leaving Darren troubled. That night, as his division slept, Darren detected movement at the perimeter of their camp. Silent figures slipped between crystal formations with practiced ease, Nixian infiltrators but not wearing the royal insignia. Darren triggered a silent alarm to alert his most trusted warriors, then moved to intercept the intruders. He counted 7, too many for him to handle alone, but he needed to keep them from reaching the settlement where civilian casualties could result. The first attacker struck from behind a crystalline outcropping. Darren barely dodged the energy blade, its edge sizzling past his face. He countered with a swift strike to the attacker's midsection, using the combat style he'd developed, a hybrid of Nixian precision and human adaptability. 2 more converged on him as the first fell. Darren used their coordinated attack against them, positioning himself so one attacker's lunge nearly impaled the other. The hesitation gave him the opening to disable both with targeted blows to nerve clusters he'd learned from studying Nixian physiology. A shout from the direction of the camp told him his division had engaged the remaining infiltrators. Alara's voice could be heard directing defense patterns he'd taught them. When it was over, 2 attackers had escaped. 1 lay dead, and 4 were captured. They wore no insignia, but the quality of their weapons and armor suggested resources beyond common dissidents. "Traditionalists?" Ilara asked, nursing a burn on her arm where an energy blade had grazed her. "Perhaps," Darren said, examining one of the captured weapons, "but something doesn't fit. These aren't zealots. They're trained operatives." He turned to the prisoners. "Who sent you?" None would speak, but one's gaze flickered with recognition when Darren mentioned returning to the palace. It was enough to confirm his suspicions. This attack had connections to the royal court itself. "We need to warn the Queen," he told Ilara. "Establish a secure communication channel." But their communications array had been sabotaged during the attack. Only short-range transmissions remained functional, not enough to reach the palace across the planet. "We need to return immediately," Darren decided. "Leave a small contingent here to protect the settlement and monitor for further activity." 3 days later, as their transport approached the palace, Darren knew something was wrong. The usual security protocols were altered, and unfamiliar guards monitored the landing platform. Division Leader Voss, a stern voice greeted him as he disembarked. Commander Thaxus stood flanked by a full complement of royal guards. "By order of the Conclave of Elders, you are hereby detained, pending investigation of conspiracy against the crown." "What madness is this?" Darren demanded. "Where's the Queen?" "Her Radiance has been advised to distance herself from compromising influences during the investigation," Thaxus replied with poorly concealed satisfaction. As guards moved to restrain him, Darren caught sight of a small figure watching from a high balcony. Princess Lyra, Her tiny hands pressed against the crystal barrier, her expression one of confusion and distress. "Tell the Queen," Darren called to Alara before they were separated. The attack came from within. In the detention cell, fashioned from nullifying crystal that dampened even sound, Darren pieced together what must have happened. The traditionalists had made their move, using rumors of his relationship with the Queen as leverage to force a formal investigation by the Conclave of Elders, a body whose authority predated even the monarchy. But the coordinated attack suggested something more complex than religious fundamentalism. Someone was using the traditionalists as cover for a more sophisticated power play. Hours later, the cell barrier shimmered, admitting a hooded figure. When the hood fell back, Darren was startled to see Zivara herself, though without her royal adornments. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "I am still queen," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "The Conclave cannot prevent me from interviewing a prisoner." "This is no ordinary investigation," Darren told her, explaining the attack and his suspicions. Zivara's tendrils coiled tightly, a sign of deep distress. "The Conclave has called for a right of succession. They claim I am unfit due to inappropriate attachments. They can't possibly have evidence. They have manufactured what they need," she interrupted. "The question is why now and who benefits?" Her eyes met his. "Lyra asks for you constantly. She senses the danger even if she doesn't understand it." Darren moved closer, fighting the urge to offer physical comfort that would only validate the accusations against them. "Is she safe?" "For now. As my heir, she is protected by ancient law." Zivara's voice dropped lower. "But if I am removed?" "Who leads the Conclave's investigation?" Darren asked, mind racing through possibilities. "Elder Myrax arrived from the outer settlements 2 days ago to present evidence of my alleged indiscretions." The pieces clicked into place. The attack was meant to keep us isolated in the settlement while they made their move here, Darren realized. "But who stands to gain from your removal? Who succeeds if both you and Lyra are disqualified?" A shadow crossed Zivara's face. "My consort's brother Thalon. He has always been vocal about maintaining isolation, though he rarely involves himself directly in court politics. Until now," Darren concluded grimly. The barrier shimmered, warning of another presence approaching. "I cannot free you without confirming the accusations," Zivara whispered urgently. "But Alara and your loyal warriors remain at liberty. They will act on your behalf." As she replaced her hood and prepared to leave, Darren spoke once more. "Zivara." It was the first time he had used her name without title. "Whatever they claim about us, know that my loyalty to you and Lyra is real." Her multifaceted eyes held his for a moment that stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. "As is mine to you," she replied softly before disappearing beyond the shimmering barrier. Alone again, Darren began meticulously planning. The traditionalists had made the first move in this game of power, but they had overlooked something critical. They had united the Queen's progressive faction and Darren's division against a common threat. And they had threatened the princess that both would die to protect. The endgame was approaching, and Darren had no intention of remaining in a cell when it arrived. Thalon's facade cracked slightly. "You understand nothing of loyalty. You, who would dilute our bloodline with alien influence." His gaze shifted to Darren with undisguised hatred. "Our people deserve a pure-blooded ruler committed to our isolation and strength." "Our people deserve the truth," came a powerful voice from behind him. The first guardian entered, Alara at his side. In his hand was the crystal orb containing the damning evidence. "I have seen enough to know where true loyalty lies, Prince Thalon." For a moment, tension crystallized the air itself. Then Thalon gave a signal and battle erupted. Darren moved to shield Zivara and Lyra as energy weapons discharged around them. The Queen was no helpless royal. Her scepter cut through the air with practiced precision, disabling 2 attackers with swift strikes. Working in concert, Darren and Zivara created a defensive perimeter around Lyra. There was no need for words or signals between them. They moved as if they had fought together for years, his adaptive style complementing her formal training perfectly. The first Guardian's arrival had shifted the balance. Palace security, now aware of Thalon's treason, converged on the ritual chambers. Realizing his coup was failing, Thalen made a desperate lunge toward Lyra, a final attempt to secure a hostage. He never reached her. Darren intercepted him with a move no Nixian would anticipate, a simple human tackle that sent them both crashing into the ritual pool. They struggled beneath the luminescent water, Thalan's superior strength nearly overwhelming Darren until a purple hand plunged into the water, delivering a precise strike to Thalen's pressure point. Zivara helped Darren from the water, as guards secured her unconscious brother. "It seems," she said with the ghost of a smile, "that I have now saved you as well." As the immediate danger passed, Lyra wiggled free from Lyria's protective embrace and rushed to both of them, her small arms attempting to encircle them both. The gesture was not lost on those watching, the princess connecting the queen and the outsider in a family embrace. Zivara met Darren's eyes over their daughter's head. Whatever had existed between them before, respect, gratitude, cautious affection, had transformed in the crucible of shared danger into something deeper and undeniable. "The right of succession," Darren began hesitantly, aware of the many eyes upon them. "Will continue," Zivara declared, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "But it will be a rite of affirmation instead. The conclave will witness the strength of our leadership, not as it has been, but as it must become for Nixia to survive in a connected galaxy." She lifted Lyra into her arms, then extended her free hand to Darren in full view of the court. The gesture's significance was unmistakable, an invitation, a declaration of future reimagined. Darren took her hand, feeling the delicate strength of her fingers intertwining with his. Tomorrow would bring political battles, resistance from traditionalists, and the complex work of building new alliances. But in this moment, as three beings from two worlds stood united, the whispered promise of a new era echoed through the ancient crystal halls of Nixia. Dawn broke over Ixora Prime in shades of amethyst and gold, illuminating the great amphitheater where the Nixian people had gathered for generations to witness moments of historical significance. Today would be such a day, though not in the way tradition had anticipated. Darren stood at the edge of the royal procession, watching as Queen Zivara addressed the assembled conclave of elders and the thousands of citizens beyond. Her voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the crystal amphitheater, carried to the farthest reaches. "For millennia, we have believed our strength lay in separation," she declared, her formal regalia catching the light of Ixora's twin suns. "Yet in our isolation, we became vulnerable to threats we refused to understand." The evidence against Thalan had been presented in full, his conspiracy with the Krillians exposed, his role in his brother's assassination confirmed through recovered communications. The traditionalists who had aligned with him now found themselves discredited, though not silenced. "The outsider has bewitched her," one elder muttered loudly enough for Darren to hear. "She would destroy 1,000 years of purity for an alien lover." Darren kept his expression neutral despite the provocation. The past month had been filled with such challenges, each one testing the fragile alliance forming between progressive Nixians and the new path Zivara envisioned. On the central dais, Lyra sat beside her mother, the formal circlet of the heir apparent glittering among her tendrils. Despite her youth, she conducted herself with remarkable composure, occasionally casting reassuring glances toward Darren that touched him deeply. "Today we affirm not just the continuation of a bloodline, but the evolution of a civilization," Zivara continued. "The rite of affirmation calls for the sovereign to present their vision for Nixia's future. Mine is one of strategic alliance, of strength through connection rather than isolation." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some approving, others resistant. Zivara raised her hand for silence. "To demonstrate my commitment to this vision, I have made two decisions. First, I am establishing a diplomatic corps, tasked with building relations beyond our system, starting with reparations to those harmed by the Krillians acting under Nixian direction." This was expected. Darren had helped draft the framework for this initiative, but her next words caught even him by surprise. "Second, I invoke the ancient right of sovereign choice." Her eyes found Darren's across the distance between them. "I choose as my consort and co-ruler one who has proven his loyalty to Nixia through actions rather than bloodline. Darren Voss, protector of the royal heir and defender of the throne." The amphitheater erupted. Traditionalists shouted objections while progressives cheered. The first guardian, now firmly aligned with the queen after Thalan's betrayal, stepped forward to raise his arms for order. The sovereign's choice has not been invoked in 7 generations, he announced, but it remains valid under our most ancient laws. Any who would challenge it must do so through the right of contest. An elder rose from the conclave section. I, Elder Myrax, invoke the right of contest on behalf of the traditionalist faction. The outsider must prove his worth through the 3 trials of ascension. Darren stepped forward, the path to Zivara suddenly clear as the crowd parted before him. This too they had anticipated, though not so quickly. I accept the right of contest, he declared, his voice steady despite the enormity of what was happening. He had come to Nixia as a mercenary seeking purpose. Now he stood on the precipice of becoming something no human had ever been. Consort to an alien queen, stepfather to her heir, bridge between worlds. The first trial came swiftly, the trial of knowledge. Darren was sequestered in the ancient library, tasked with answering questions about Nixian history, law, and culture. His months of study while training his division served him well, but the elders had chosen the most obscure aspects of their civilization to test him. When he emerged 12 hours later, even Myrax could not deny he had passed, though the elder's dark purple skin had deepened with displeasure. The second trial, the trial of endurance, proved more challenging. For 3 days, Darren was suspended in a crystal resonance chamber, where harmonic frequencies tested the limits of physical tolerance. No Nixian had ever failed this trial, their physiological attunement to crystal energies protecting them from the worst effects. Darren had no such advantage. By the final day, every nerve ending screamed for relief as the resonance penetrated to his very bones. Only thoughts of Zivara and Lyra, of the future they might build together, kept him conscious and determined. When the chamber finally opened, Darren collapsed into Alara's waiting arms. Through blurred vision, he saw concern on the faces of even some traditionalists. He had endured what many believed impossible for a human, and in doing so, earned a measure of respect. Recovery took another 2 days, time Zivara spent consolidating political support and quelling the remaining pockets of resistance to her vision. When she visited Darren in the healing chambers away from public eyes, the formal distance required by protocol finally fell away. You should not have had to suffer so, she said softly, her fingers tracing the lingering resonance marks on his skin, temporary tattoos left by the crystal harmonics. Some things are worth suffering for, he replied, capturing her hand in his. But I admit I'm not looking forward to the final trial. The trial of combat was the most straightforward yet potentially deadly challenge. Single combat against a champion chosen by the challenger. Traditionally fought until submission, there had been cases in Nixian history where contestants had died rather than yield. Myrax has chosen Thaxus as his champion, Zivara informed him. He remains loyal to the traditionalist cause despite Thalen's disgrace. Darren nodded grimly. The commander had made no secret of his resentment, and now he would have sanctioned opportunity to act on it. On the day of the final trial, the combat arena was filled beyond capacity. Nixians from across the planet had traveled to witness this unprecedented event. A human fighting for the right to stand beside their queen. Lyra had insisted on attending despite her mother's concerns. Starman will win, she had declared with childlike certainty. Now she sat beside Zivara in the royal box, her small face solemn but unafraid. Thaxus entered the arena first, his ceremonial armor gleaming with embedded crystals that enhanced his already formidable strength and speed. A ripple of appreciation moved through the crowd. He was the epitome of Nixian warrior tradition, a living embodiment of their martial history. When Darren emerged, the contrast was striking. He had declined ceremonial armor, opting instead for the modified combat suit he'd worn as a mercenary. It offered flexibility over protection, a choice that caused murmurs throughout the arena. The trial of combat will proceed until one contestant submits or is rendered unable to continue, the first guardian announced. Begin. Thaxus attacked immediately, his energy blade tracing lethal arcs through the air. Darren evaded rather than parried, conserving energy while studying his opponent's patterns. He had trained with Thaxus, knew his textbook adherence to Nixian combat forms both a strength and a weakness. For several minutes, Darren merely defended, allowing Thaxus to expend energy on increasingly frustrated attacks. The crowd grew restless, some calling for Darren to engage rather than avoid.
Fight like a warrior, not a coward.
Thaxus taunted, launching another perfectly executed combination. This time Darren countered, not with Nixian precision but with the unpredictable adaptability that had kept him alive across countless battlefields. He slipped inside Thaxus's guard, using the commander's momentum against him in a move no traditional training would anticipate. Thaxus stumbled, genuinely surprised. Before he could recover, Darren pressed his advantage, targeting the joints of the ceremonial armor with precisely calculated strikes. Not to injure, but to unbalance and disrupt. The fight shifted. Thaxus abandoned form for fury, his attacks becoming wilder as Darren continued to counter in ways that defied prediction. Sweat beaded on the commander's purple skin, while Darren maintained the steady breathing he'd perfected through years of combat discipline. "You fight without honor," Thaxus gasped after a particularly effective counter left him momentarily winded. "I fight to win," Darren replied simply, circling his opponent. "As I trained my division to do, to adapt rather than merely execute." The mention of the division, many of whom were present, caused a stir. Those young warriors had distinguished themselves during Thalan's failed coup, their hybrid tactics proving surprisingly effective against the Krillian infiltrators. Thaxus launched himself forward in a desperate attack. Darren sidestepped, caught the commander's arm, and used a joint lock technique that forced Thaxus to his knees. The energy blade clattered to the arena floor. "Submit," Darren said quietly, applying just enough pressure to demonstrate his control without causing unnecessary pain. For a long moment, pride warred with reality in Thaxus's expression. Then, with a formal gesture recognized by all Nixians, he tapped the arena floor 3 times, the signal of submission. The arena erupted in sound, cheers, protests, exclamations of disbelief. Darren released Thaxus immediately, then extended his hand to help the commander rise. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Thaxus accepted the gesture. "You fought well," Darren told him with genuine respect. "As did you," Thaxus acknowledged grudgingly, "though not as a Nixian would." "Perhaps that is the point," Darren replied. The first guardian approached, raising Darren's hand. "The right of contest is complete. The sovereign's choice stands affirmed by ancient law and proven worth." From the royal box, Zivara descended to the arena floor, Lyra holding tightly to her hand. The queen's expression remained regally composed, but her eyes conveyed what protocol prevented her from expressing publicly. "Darren Voss," she announced formally, "you have endured the 3 trials of ascension. By the authority vested in me as sovereign of Nixia, I name you royal consort and co-regent." She extended the ceremonial scepter toward him. "Do you accept this covenant between yourself and the throne?" Darren knelt, taking hold of the scepter as tradition required. "I accept this covenant between myself and the throne, between my world and yours, between our past and our shared future." The formal words of acceptance transformed into something more personal, more profound. Even the traditionalist could not deny the sincerity in his voice or the symbolism of the moment, as Lyra broke protocol to rush forward, placing her small hands over theirs on the scepter. "The covenant is sealed," the first guardian declared. "Rise, consort Darren, guardian of the threshold." The title, Guardian of the Threshold, was newly created, signifying his unique position as bridge between Nixia and the greater galaxy. As he rose, Zivara's hand still joined with his through the scepter, Darren caught Elder Myrax's gaze across the arena. The elder's expression remained disapproving, but he offered a formal bow of acknowledgement. Not acceptance, perhaps, but recognition of the legal and traditional validity of what had transpired. It was a beginning. 1 year later, Darren stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned diplomatic vessel Covenant. Below, the crystalline spires of the royal palace glittered in Ixora's light. Beside him, Zivara reviewed final preparations for their diplomatic mission to the Interstellar Alliance, the first official Nixian delegation in generations. "Nervous?" he asked, noting the slight agitation of her tendrils. "Cautiously optimistic," she corrected with the hint of a smile. "The training exercises with your division have prepared our diplomatic corps well." "Our diplomatic corps?" he reminded her gently. After months of careful integration, the distinction between his initiatives and hers had gradually dissolved into shared vision. Lyra burst onto the observation deck, her boundless energy undiminished by the formal diplomatic attire she wore. At 6 Nixian years, equivalent to an 8-year-old human child, she had grown both physically and in her understanding of her unique position in history. "Is it time to depart?" she asked eagerly, her tendrils rippling with excitement. Elder Myrax is waiting with the ceremonial blessing. Darren and Zivara exchanged surprised glances. The elder's participation had been uncertain until the last moment. His agreement to perform the traditional blessing representing a significant concession from the traditionalist faction. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting," Zivara replied, taking her daughter's hand. As they walked together toward the launch bay, Darren reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From mercenary to consort, from isolation to alliance, from suspicion to grudging acceptance, each step had seemed impossible until it was achieved. The challenges ahead remained formidable. Not all Nixians embraced change. Not all species in the Interstellar Alliance would welcome Nixian involvement. The path they walked was untested, the future unwritten. Yet as Lyra skipped between them, one hand in her mother's and one in his, Darren felt a certainty that transcended doubt. They had forged something unprecedented, a covenant not just between two beings who had found love across the stars, but between worlds that had yet to discover all they might become together. Elder Myrax awaited them at the ceremonial arch, his expression still stern but no longer hostile. As he raised his hands to begin the blessing, Lyra whispered loudly enough for both her parents to hear. "See? I told you Starman would stay forever." Zivara's fingers tightened around Darren's, her multifaceted eyes meeting his with shared amusement and deeper emotion. Forever was a weighty promise, especially between beings of different worlds and lifespans. But as the ancient words of blessing washed over them and the stars beckoned beyond, Darren embraced the promise with his whole heart. Some journeys began with a single step. Theirs had begun with a child abandoned amid conflict, with compassion that transcended species, with courage that defied tradition. Where it would lead, none could say with certainty, but they would walk it together, beneath the light of shared stars.